Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. Welcome back to Shop Talk. I'm assuming this is not your first time. If it turns out that this is your first time, welcome back when you have traveled through the time machine and somehow it takes you right back to this point in time. And I don't know exactly why, but probably to assassinate somebody. Speaking of which, Mala is mysteriously disappeared. So if one of you in chat has come back from the future and assassinated her, that's not cool. Mala will also, strangely enough, disappear for a little while. She's going on vacation. Maybe she's the one who had the time machine. I don't know. I'm not sure how time machines would work in linear time. Do you have the missing gaps, or is she going to come back in the future? Like after 6 months has passed, will she come back 6 months from now, or will she just come back immediately, having expended 6 months of her life? Those are the types of deep insights that you come to Shop Talk for, and you're not going to get them. So, what we have with us today is the one and only Mike Christensen. Welcome, Mike.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
I assume that there are no other Mike Christensens around. If there are,
In Denmark, there are.
We're going to have to Highlander them. There can be only one. But speaking of only one, if this is your first time, welcome to Shop Talk. We're not usually this strange. Tonight we're strange, but normally we're much more even-keeled, not laid back. We're I'm going to say even-keeled. I'm going to say that we never get off track, that we have a set agenda and we do exactly that agenda and nothing else. I'm going to say that even though it is all lies. So the idea of Shop Talk is that it's a chat-driven program, meaning that it's chat's job to distract me, to drive me off the edge into a cliff full of rants, and chat's usually very good at it. This is a thing that they have trained their entire lives for. So we're going to see how they do it tonight. Before that happens, though, I do have very important announcement number 1. And I got to share my screen for very important announcement number 1. There it is. The Triangle Area SQL Server User Group, otherwise known as TriPass, otherwise known as the user group that we're speaking on behalf of, because Mike and I are part of the board, which is kind of how we got up here on Shop Talk. So that's the secret. If you ever want to be on Shop Talk, you just got to join the board. Spoilers. We have our call for speakers for TriPass 2025. I usually promote this very frequently, like every episode of Shop Talk, but we have 3 separate subgroups for TriPass. There's the Advanced DBA, second Tuesday of the month. There's the main meeting, third Tuesday of the month. There is the Data Science and Business Intelligence meeting, fourth Tuesday of the month. And Tracy has put together this call for speakers for 2025, talking about each one of those groups, which gives an idea of what it is we do, who we're looking for, what kinds of talks we want. This is open. You may notice we have lots and lots of spots available. What that means is, are you interested in speaking for TriPass? If so, go to sessionize.com/TriPass-2025 and submit a session or 3. Tracy will review your sessions, find one that best fits, and probably got a speaking slot. We would be glad to have a variety of speakers, new, experienced, less experienced, ideally in person. If you happen to be in the Triangle area, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, we have a main meeting that is in person, and we love having in-person speakers. So third Tuesday of the month is for that. Otherwise, got a deep 300, 400 level topic, sign up for the Advanced DBA group. Submit a session for it. Talking about data science and business intelligence, we do that 10 months a year. Basically, we're happy to work with people, and you can even put in a TBD topic if you're not quite sure what it is you want to talk about, but know that you'd like to have a chance to talk. And Tracy's happy to do a little bit of communication about if you're a brand new speaker, you want to get an idea of what it's like. So she has her contact info in there as well. This is all very well put together, extremely well put together. And for that reason, I am pounding the table to get people to submit sessions. I actually have no idea how many people have submitted sessions so far, but Hopefully that number goes up. So that is item number 1 on the list. Item number 2 on the list is we're going to have to talk about elections, but these are TriPass elections. So I sent out an email. Yeah, no, don't worry, Mike. We're staying far clear of talking about the elections in Burkina Faso. We are not talking about those, but we are talking about the elections for TriPass.
Burkina Faso. I haven't heard that since my last trivia night years ago.
Well, I blame Tom Norman for letting me get away with having TriPass elections in November. This seemed like I don't know what I was thinking. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but it probably wasn't. However, we have TriPass elections coming up. There are 3 board slots that we've got people running for. And so, admittedly, we have people running for all 3. However, if you are interested in joining the TriPass board, this is your opportunity. Reach out to me. You can send me an email. You could send the Shop Talk email. You could talk to me on Meetup. You could send a telegraph to me. I don't know how I would collect it, but maybe there's a Western Union somewhere that I could pick it up. But nonetheless, reach out if you're interested. Now, in a couple of weeks, I think it's the 3rd Thursday of the month, that's when voting actually opens up. I'm going to send out another email to the TriPass membership list and say, hey, voting is open. Do you want to vote for these people? If we have nobody else who says, I want to run for a TriPass board seat, basically it'll just be an open slate, or it'll be a slate election, meaning we've got the 3 people who are running, and I've got to pull up who it is. It's Mala, Rick, Pack, and me. So we've got the president, this guy. We have treasurer Mala, and we have VP of marketing, Rick Pack. And we'll have, assuming that nobody else says, I want to run, we'll have a slate election that just says, do you vote for this slate of candidates? And if we get more yeses than nos, then we'll have a board for another year until Mike and Tracy go up next year. All that said, if you're interested, reach out to me. If you're not interested, don't reach out to me until I send out that follow-up email where we have our vote, in which case, then reach out to me. So that's what I've got for anything election related. And thank goodness for enunciation. But on that topic, on the topic of thanking goodness for enunciation, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we had an email. So somebody emailed us, which you can do that. Actually, if you check down below, you will eventually see an email address that actually works. Sometimes I even respond. So Alex, who did not ask to be anonymous, so this is not a L. Simpson scenario like last time around, but Alex said, hey, in a fairly recent episode of Shop Talk, and I don't remember when, we'll have to find somebody who's more familiar with the lore and update the wiki and let us know. But Mike, our own Mike, mentioned that he's working as part of a project to migrate from Oracle to SQL Server. And so Alex was asking, well, what led Duke, in this case, to choose SQL Server instead of I wish this weren't live so that I could just start that takeover. But what led Duke to use SQL Server instead of Postgres or MySQL or some other open source database management system? And I wanted to let Mike respond, and then I wanted to throw in my own generic remarks. So, Mike.
Sure. There's a list of reasons. So one reason is, I guess I think that I guess there's maybe 2 main reasons. So it is the Oracle licensing and costs is pretty prohibitive. So they've actually before I'll bring up 2 in a second. The reason in a second. We've been investigating transferring to SQL Server for a while because we've also Duke we're one group of many, but let's say there's 60 people in our group. We're kind of managing the transition in our group. Let me close my door.
Now Mike has to shut the door because this is secret information. So chat, don't let any of
Dramatization.
this out.
Yeah, it's all public knowledge now. But um, we have a cloud instance. We have partnerships with Microsoft, so we do get additional perks in terms of licensing. So we share information with them, and they give us expertise and some Azure. It's not for free or anything like that. We get like discounts, and we get expertise, and we get access to their engineers. So we have a larger Microsoft partnership going on that's been announced long ago, and we're switching to Power BI. We're getting off of Tableau. So the SQL Server thing makes sense, and that's been in motion for many years for a variety of things. The other reason is that there's kind of business gatekeeping going on, meaning in the marketplace of healthcare, there's what I would call like regulatory capture. They're in the electronic healthcare market, when you're talking to your doctor and they're typing in notes, there's some bespoke options, there's all scripts, there's some McKesson features out there, there's other competitors, but Epic has 80% market share of kind of the hospital space and multiple practice space. So they're kind of the behemoth in the group, right? So they're like Google search for search, that they're really big. One of the things that happened is that Cerner is probably their second or third in terms of competition, obviously much smaller market share. However, Cerner was purchased by Oracle. So Oracle now is competing with Epic, okay? So there's a business reason why. One of the things that Epic is doing internally is Epic, when you sign up for Epic and you buy a license and get trained and all that, there's all different levels of, there's analysts that actually customize the program on the front end. There's people like me that do database work, and you can customize stuff. And they have a menu of database options that they support. So if you think about it like this, Duke has a patient base of like 5 million patients, which sounds like a lot based on North Carolina, but it's over it's since the 1990s, and people come and go, and people visit from states, so it's a large population. So we have X amount of data, right? Epic has a copy of that data, anonymized. So they kind of have a copy of our data that's behind the scenes. So they have their own database stack. You can imagine it's got to be pretty sophisticated because we're only one hospital system of many. We're one of the largest, with UCSF being, I think, the largest. We're, I think, maybe the second or third. So we have a lot, but like nationwide and worldwide, they're in the Netherlands and UK and other places. They have a copy of all the data. So they support certain databases that interact with their whole infrastructure, like the MUMPs, the M language they have. That's when they started building it. So they have a lot of bespoke things so they support DB2, they support Oracle, they support SQL Server. So there's a menu. I don't know that Postgres is even on the menu. And I don't know the pros and cons of that, but so they're transitioning from support of Oracle. So eventually anybody who uses Epic eventually over time is not going to be using Oracle because they're not going to support it. So you just wouldn't have it as an option, right? So if you had a custom Linux machine, there's only so many distros of databases that you could possibly use. You can containerize things for sure, but natively it's a little bit different. So business stuff is one, and then two, it's saving money, not only because Oracle is more expensive than SQL Server in terms of the features that we use and the database support that we need, but also we have a larger partnership to be mindful of, where we're getting expertise for free, and we're getting compute, and we're getting expertise to help us transition some things to the cloud. Not everything's going to be in the cloud, but that's the longer term plan. But there's many things that are in the cloud right now. I've worked on some projects where there's straight up data type assets that have kind of a front end, almost like Tableau that we have in Azure. and we have Fabric is getting all rolled out too here. So those are the biggest reasons, because it's not easy, right? So it's from a business perspective, it's like, okay, our entire enterprise is on Google Sheets. Now we have to go to Excel, or the opposite. Everybody uses Excel now. Everybody uses Google Sheets without exception. Well, some of the formulas are different, and it's just like due diligence that nobody wants to do because it doesn't really move the needle working on projects, converting projects that you built 2 years ago. But that's where we're at.
Fair enough. And so, recapping that for everybody, those two reasons won't necessarily apply in a lot of scenarios, but in this particular one, they make a lot of sense. Hey, we're getting a lot of money from Microsoft and subsidization, so certainly helps. And also, if third parties may or may not support some of these technologies, that can be an issue. So that makes a lot of sense in that particular scenario. Now, Solomon in chat says, why not Lotus Notes or Fox Pro? And I did not know that we were talking about technologies better than DB2 again, but I'm glad that we are. I have a few reasons, a few ideas as well, and not necessarily let's drag Postgres, because actually I'll talk about, hey, why would you choose Postgres before I would say, hey, why would you choose SQL Server? And this is outside of those particular conditions that Mike was talking about. So there's almost zero overlap in our discussion points, which is nice. Postgres. Postgres is open source, meaning there are no licensing fees. That's great, especially compared to Oracle, to DB2, to SQL Server, even to a lot of other technologies that have been around or are around. They still tend to have licensing even in the open source model. I remember React back when it was a thing.
I know, that's okay.
React, well, they had a licensing model. You could install it and run it directly yourself, but if you actually wanted any kind of support, you were paying Basho. And Postgres is extremely extensible. There are a huge number of extensions covering a wide variety of technologies, turning Postgres into a vector database, turning it into a GIS platform, turning it into a full text search engine. Basically, it is probably the most extensible relational database platform. All very good reasons why a company might choose to go on Postgres, especially in a greenfield project. So then you would ask, well, in that case, why SQL Server? I mean, you have to pay money for SQL Server, so why would you do that? There are a couple of, I would call them legacy reasons. There are a couple of current very good reasons. One of the legacy reasons was that you got more in the bundle. You get integration services, so an ETL tool that was pretty decent. Reporting services, a reporting platform that was pretty decent. Analysis services, a multidimensional cube solution that was good. Reporting services, you could argue about whether it was good or decent. Today, I think Power BI has pretty much eaten SSRS's lunch. Integration services was always kind of a okay ETL tool. You got it for free with SQL Server, so that's a big reason why companies used it and still use it. But I don't think it was ever a fantastic tool. Analysis services, very good cube engine. Now, these bundled options are a lot less critical today, and you can tell because Microsoft hasn't put much love into any of the three in the last 6 years at least, meaning that they don't see it as a value add either. So that's more of a historical reason why you might have gotten in on the gig. A current, very big reason is you have better enterprise support. You have really good enterprise support compared to Postgres, both official and unofficial. If I have an issue with Postgres, I can't call up the Postgres company and say, hey, I've run into a memory dump. Help me fix this. I can call up Microsoft if I have a memory dump in SQL Server and say, hey, I have a memory dump. Help me fix this. Now, I may have to route through 2 or 3 layers before I get to the right people, unless I happen to know who the right people are, which some people would know who those right people are and could reach out immediately. I have, Tracy has. We have a few people we know. But anyhow, if you have that kind of an issue, you will get to the right person eventually, the right person who can and gets paid by Microsoft to help people through these sorts of issues. That all comes as part of the licensing, as part of the paid agreement. You can pay companies for support from Postgres, but it's not quite the same thing. Especially if you're like looking at a third party service to help you with support, they'll have access to source control just like Microsoft has access to SQL Server source control. However, you don't necessarily have people who've spent 15, 20 years really drilling through that source code able to assist in more complex issues. And that kind of thing gets expensive. You're having to pay very intelligent, highly capable people, typically a lot of money, to keep them invested, keep them digging through this kind of solution. And that's a major benefit to the enterprise side, where, if I'm working at a large company, I have a contract with Microsoft where it's millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, people are going to pick up that phone. Somebody, because if support person doesn't know and we have to escalate it up and we can't find the right person, eventually corporate VP calls up Microsoft VP at his personal number, and Microsoft VP then starts calling around saying, no, you got to get this fixed. Which I use that as an example because that has happened. That actually does happen fairly frequently. There have been Microsoft corporate vice presidents who will receive calls and then immediately say, get this problem solved. That there is that escalation system. And you don't necessarily have that same type of power as a consumer. Instead, you have, I can email a support list. I can put out a GitHub issue. I can maybe ask a local group, and hopefully I can get a decent response. Or I could pay somebody a support contract, and again, hopefully I can get a decent response. But it's not necessarily the same. Speaking of communities, I do believe the SQL Server community is the best community when it comes to data platform. And I know some of this is bias on my part because I've been involved in the SQL Server community for so long. But I have talked a lot with people who are deeply embedded in Oracle, in Postgres, less so in MySQL, admittedly. But for both of those groups, there's not the same experience. Oracle's community historically has been kind of top down. It's been there's a small number of groups of people, and until fairly recently, you didn't have a lot of proper community. The idea of an Oracle Saturday, kind of like a SQL Saturday, would have just been anathema to them. Like, how is Oracle making money on this? And you say, "What? You're not. It's a community thing." Oh, well, we're not interested.
Right.
You have things like the Oak Table, but then that's kind of tied in pretty closely with corporate Oracle. You had a few people who would blog, but not a lot. So, I remember the days when Ask Tom was essentially the only way you could get information from Oracle or on Oracle without actually going to an Oracle person.
Now it's Hey Jeff or I'm Jeff or
right. So, admittedly, this is Oracle. Postgres has more community, absolutely. It is an open source project. It is a very successful open source project. There is a good amount of community, but I think there's a much smaller sharing of knowledge. There are a lot fewer people actively, regularly engaged in sharing information on Postgres. And so my evidence for backing this up is all the work I do with curated SQL, where I try to find people who are talking about these sorts of things, who are writing blog posts and articles on topics all across the data platform space. And you find a good amount on Postgres. So please don't take my words the wrong way and that, nobody in the Postgres community does anything. Where I'm saying it's different is I think there's a lot more in the SQL Server community. Knowing that on any given Saturday, I could be somewhere in the world and there's a SQL Saturday event happening there. That there are a lot of conferences, groups, local groups broader groups. They're even today, even post COVID, where a lot of the community has gone underground or disappeared, there's still a lot more than what you would find in the Postgres world. You don't find the kind of broader based, here's lots of different Postgres conferences. And some of the ones that you do find tend to be more developers of Postgres rather than developers on Postgres. And that little preposition matters a whole lot, because the first is people who are creating Postgres or extensions for Postgres, whereas the second one is people who are creating solutions on, who are administering, who are consumers of Postgres and its extensions. And so you tend not to have as much information sharing from the latter group. Now, you'll have more information sharing from the former group, the people who are Postgres extension writers or core developers, and they'll talk about some of the deep internals. And you don't get that same experience in the SQL Server community, except for Microsoft bloggers, people who work for Microsoft, who write technical articles, who write blog posts. But even then, I could say, check out how many blog posts Bob Dorr had, or Chris Gerlinski, or Bob Ward, or some of these other people who have hundreds or thousands of blog posts covering topics going everywhere from like 100 level, hey, look at this neat feature, to 400 level, let me talk about these trace flags so that I can help explain the mechanics behind how a backup operation works. And you'll see a lot of that. This is official Microsoft blogging. It's not official documentation, but it's people who know what they're talking about because either they developed the solution or have access to the source code or have worked with customers on these sorts of problems and written about it. And so I kind of correlate those two, but then you have this huge group of people who aren't related to Microsoft. Like, I have no relationship with Microsoft directly. I am a Microsoft MVP. They give me an award. It's really cool. Sometimes I go to Redmond. Sometimes they tell me things that then I later come back and pretend that I don't know, because I'm not allowed to talk about them until they launch. So I do have that kind of a relationship, but I'm not a blue badge. I've never worked for Microsoft. I've never been a contractor for them. They've never paid me for that. I have to be very specific about this, but because I have been paid for training, delivering training, but that's a totally different thing. So I got to be a little bit specific in my disclosures. But nonetheless, a lot of my argumentation for, hey, why would you go with SQL Server? A lot of it does come down to community, to finding skilled people. Historically, it's been a lot easier to find skilled people in the SQL Server world than in the Postgres world. And I'll just tell a story from a company I used to work for, and they had gotten a bit of Postgres hype. This was about a decade ago. They were very much in on Postgres, and some of the developers at the company loved it, started using it in new projects. And the database people who were there, Solomon is here, so I don't want to say anything Marshall's here as well, so I don't want to say anything that will necessarily contradict reality. So, but then this was also a little bit before my time, so we'll see how far I go off the ledge before they say, Wile E. Coyote, you shouldn't look down. But basically, there's this love for Postgres. Hey, we would save licensing costs. Hey, it's a really cool product. And then they were trying to find qualified Postgres people, really sharp people to match the SQL Server people who they had in-house, and struggled to find good Postgres developers in the area. And admittedly, this is not a small area. This is not like a technical outhouse. This is not a place where, there's only 20 or 30 technically inclined people in the area. This is a pretty big region for tech, and it also was a decade ago. So it's not Silicon Valley. It's not like a top 3, top 5 destination location for technical people, but it's still pretty good. A very strong area. And could not find good Postgres developers. The support contract was with a company who said that they were really good at Postgres, and it turns out that apparently they weren't, because within a few years, Everything had fallen apart very quickly on one project, and within about 5 years or so, there was an active maneuver to get off of Postgres. So Marshall's chiming in. Okay, actually, it was about a decade later, so this was earlier than my time. Yeah, you're exactly right about the challenge of finding qualified Postgres developers. This was 2006 to 2008. See, I thought it was like 2010 to 12, but maybe that was a second project, or maybe it was 2006 2008, and I was missing on the date. But things were a little bit different in knowledge. Microsoft was jacking up the SQL Server licensing, though they later decided to revisit those numbers, which in 2012 they did switch over to core-based licensing and did seriously increase the cost of SQL Server. That was also, I think, the first time when people were really looking at SQL Server and saying, well, what if I go to Postgres or MySQL instead? Then I don't have to pay $7,000 per 2-core pack for enterprise licensing. And even it was like $2,500 or so for standard edition 2-core license, which adds up pretty fast for a lot of companies if you're talking a smaller firm. I know why we did Postgres in the first place. It was definitely happening mid-late 2006. SQL Server licensing costs were a big driver there. I understand. That makes sense. And that's just one story. Now, it's anecdote. I'm not claiming this is conclusive fact. I'm also not claiming that, there's no Postgres developers out there. I have to hedge my words hard because I'm assuming that somebody is going to clip this and it's going to show up as local man hates Postgres, which is not true. My website, I use Postgres as the backend for the website because I didn't want to pay SQL Server licensing. And also is running on Linux before SQL Server supported Linux. Nonetheless, all of that said, I like Postgres as a product. I think it's a very interesting technological solution. I also think it's pretty hard to find a lot of qualified, good Postgres developers, and the broad swath of extensions and the fact that you can program Postgres in like 7 different languages, which I don't think is hyperbole. I think it actually is about 7 languages that are officially supported. That makes it even more challenging because now, even if you do have a developer who is really good at writing like Postgres solutions in C, that doesn't mean that person's any good at writing PGSQL, or writing one of the other languages that you can support. So that, I think, is a challenge that makes it more difficult to ensure that you have qualified people. And there's a smaller community, so somebody who wants to become a qualified person in Postgres might have a harder time really getting a lot of good information, or of finding different modalities for collecting that information. There has been a push among people in the SQL Server community branching out into Postgres. I know that over at Redgate, they've been doing that a lot. Grant Fritchie has been doing his work on it, and Ryan Bose has absolutely like switched over. He's gone full in on Postgres, and has, I think, dragged a lot of Redgate along with them, and in a good way, because that does help. It does help bring in qualified people when you have more people promoting, more people trying to find and develop and deliver good content. Brent Ozar has also set up some Postgres stuff. So, we are seeing some people in that SQL Server community branching out and trying to bring some of the quality of the SQL Server community over into Postgres. I'd like to see that succeed. I'd like to see multiple data platform technologies where there is a real community and where you can fairly easily get information. The whole Oracle mystical database administrators in cloaks secretly conferring and typing in cryptic commands, I never liked that. If you have to hide information to keep your job sucks. That's says the guy who works in national security.
Exactly. I think being a CIA agent would actually be a real bear.
It probably would. So Marshall says, we regretted this pretty quickly when we found out Postgres was not equivalent to SQL Server, and it was so different and needed a lot of additional knowledge. I know that Postgres has gotten a lot better and more well known in the 18 years since then. Yeah, absolutely. Solomon.
This is anecdote. One con I heard, I mean, there's lots of pros, but one con I heard too is that version upgrades are very difficult. Because I don't know if that's true or not.
That could be. Yeah. So Solomon continues spilling tea on the story, which, again, we're talking like 15 years ago. So,
Recent
that
for all of us.
basically, I'm going to call that statute of limitations is up. Management reluctantly searched for one Postgres expert at my insistence because we were all SQL Server experts and Postgres was being maintained by IT, which was a David somebody or another. So, David, we don't remember who you were, but we did hire someone who told us that we had different versions in each environment, had them configured wrong, etc. However, he was fired and we never got a good or convincing explanation as to why. That's life. Sometimes the consultant gets it. And sometimes the consultant gets it in a different way as well. So, but again, this is all one story, one company. This is not, I don't intend this to be proof of the moral inferiority of Postgres. So take it for what it's worth. But I do think both technologies have a lot of value. I like SQL Server a lot. I am very clued in on the product. I've enjoyed the product. I appreciate a lot of what's gone on, and especially in the community. I think as a technical comparison between the two, they're different, but they'll both do a really good job on a very wide variety of scenarios. They both cover a lot of the same general concepts because, well, they're both implementations of ANSI SQL, and so you necessarily have a lot of overlap. There are some things in Postgres I wish were in SQL Server, and SQL Server has things I see Postgres people deploying out like, hey, I've got this brand new extension that does this neat thing. I'm like, yeah, we've had that in SQL Server for 15 years. So there's a little bit of that. But then they come back and are like, hey, yeah, we've had this thing in Postgres for 15 years and you still don't have it in SQL Server.
Yeah, they just got, what is it, the windowing clause?
Well, Postgres actually had window clause,
extensive
windowing clauses for longer than SQL Server. SQL Server didn't get the non-ranking function window functions until 2012, and Postgres had them like 3 or 4 years earlier than that.
Gotcha.
So that's just one example, and there are other cases where Postgres has an implementation of intervals, range intervals, which SQL Server still does not have. So you can have a window function ranging over a time frame instead of over a number of rows or number of records. And we can't do that in SQL Server. I would love to have that. There are some other things as well. So Solomon's following up. That Postgres developer then went on to help maintain Postgres. I only know as I saw him respond in a forum. David, someone was fired for, quote, secretly, unquote, starting his own company, launching a product competing with one of our products, and we discovered this by seeing his overview video on YouTube. That is a way of doing things. Moral of the story, hire somebody else to create your overview video when you are taking a competitive approach to something that the company paying you for your day job offers as a product. Also, probably don't do that. If you are going to go start your own thing, at least quit your job.
I created this new software product called Excel too. My day job is working at Microsoft.
Right, exactly.
Like, are you kidding? It's like blatant theft.
Yeah, that's not smart. Not smart at all. Especially, that's a company where you could have a side hustle. You could have a side gig. You could even be in a startup. You couldn't do something that was directly competing with the company or working for or trying to steal off any of their clients. But there's a whole wide world of other stuff that you can do. And yeah, exactly. Marshall's right. There's so many other ideas out there. Go pursue one of them. Yeah. All right. Next thing I want to talk about. This is actually related to conversation. There we go. We had lunch with Kevin Klein on Sunday, last Sunday, not yesterday. So this is about a week old. But Kevin was in town for All Things Open, and Mala set this thing up. So a few of us got together. We had breakfast with Kevin, and it was neat. One of the things that we talked about was actually an issue Solomon was having around trying to come up with a way of comparison testing relative hardware performance in maybe a standardized SQL workload. And I had to bring up HammerDB because that's exactly what HammerDB's intent is. This is an open source database benchmarking application. It supports a variety of data platform technologies, SQL servers in there, but also DB2, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, and more. This is open source. It is freely available. It is kind of a messy UI, not intuitive. I mean, I did say it was an open source product, so of course its UI sucks. But don't worry, 2025 will be the year of the Linux desktop. But nonetheless, says the guy whose laptop runs Ubuntu. Nonetheless, HammerDB I think is a neat application worth discussing if you have never seen it before. The general idea is that it runs a TPC workload, and there are a couple of workloads. There's TPC-H, TPC-C. TPC-C represents kind of a standard OLTP system. And by standard, I mean literally there's a standard that a group of organizations have come up with so that when Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, DB2, they all come out with their numbers, or HP or Dell or whatever hardware solution comes out with their numbers to prove that their hardware solution or their database platform is the fastest. They use these as a way of having a baseline, a set standard for this is how you'll be able to compare so that they one company can't rig a data set where we've optimized for this exact data set and it will never work nearly as well for any other data set. And then they have some special numbers and nobody else can replicate it and nobody else can figure out how it happened. That's the idea. Now, in reality, all of these companies absolutely rig toward the TPC standard. But I suppose the benefit is, well, they all rig toward the same standard. So it's kind of even in that way. But TPC-C, as I mentioned, is transactional processing. TPC-H is more analytical, OLAP. It's a warehousing style system. And the general idea here is we have this standard database of standard size with standard queries, the exact same queries we're going to run on any data platform technology or any hardware solution. And you can run this workload with however many agents you want. So you could say, I'll spin up 100 different agents who are all making queries and see how my database platform operates under these hardware conditions. So this way, you're not tying to the peculiarities of your data platform solution, of your existing databases, existing queries, which has a negative. The negative is, well, your specific scenario may be a bit different than what TPC shows, and maybe slower in this case, faster in this case, because of some weird configuration or weird data distributions, that kind of stuff. But it is positive in the sense that most people don't know how to generate a proper workload from their own systems. And HammerDB, or using the TPC standard, TPC-C or TPC-H standards, gets you out of that problem because you don't need to try to figure out how do I simulate a workload when my data platform is so tied in and I can't create a standard workload. I can't create what is normal because it's so different over the course of the day. Or I just don't know how to create it. So this is a neat product. The UI, not great. But the analytics are pretty good. There's a lot of interesting information in here. And You can grab it for a variety of operating systems. So you can get it for Linux. There is an installer. You can get the tar.gz. You can also install this for Windows, installer or zip file, as well as getting a Docker container that has it pre-installed. The idea is that you connect it to an ODBC data source and let her rip. There's a good amount of documentation on it, how it all works, how it fits together. And I'd recommend, if you're interested, go check it out. Let me drop hammerdb.com in the chat. That way, if anybody is interested in this, you can go grab it for free. There are also a couple of products that are commercial. Oh, I'm moving all around now. I intended to grab chat and move chat to a higher position. Very professional stream. We are the most professional of streamers. There are commercial products that are built on HammerDB that cut off a lot of the rough edges, make it a bit nicer. And so if you are looking at something like that, you can check that out. But nonetheless, I wanted to call that out. And in case anybody has not seen this before, I think it's a neat product. All right. Next, we have an article that Mala gave. Mala submitted this one from Forbes. The 50th anniversary of SQL, how it defined our approach to data. And we have a little bit of fluff, but the original paper for SQL from Donald Chamberlain and Raymond Boyce of Boyce Cod fame, May 1974, set of commands that we can use to work with data and provide results back to the user. SQL as a whole is third most popular language used by professional programmers based on research by Stack Overflow. Now, when they say popular, I'm going to pull up that link because this is a particular definition of popularity as I recall. And
yeah, that's very unique.
No, actually I take it back. This is the regular definition. This is common use. I remembered there was a different thing that they had, which was more of an affinity ranking. How many people use it and enjoy it versus how many people don't or use it and don't enjoy it. But yeah, SQL and honestly, JavaScript. All right, front end. Everybody front end uses it. Anyone who has a website uses it. HTML and CSS, like that's just everybody writes HTML. Oh yeah, I use HTML all the time because I made a web page in GeoCities once. And then you have SQL, and then you have Python, and you have TypeScript for the people who know that JavaScript is an awful language, etc. Okay, going back to this article. According to the IEEE, it is the #1 language for developers looking to find a job role, as it pairs so well with other programming languages. Yeah, SQL, and I will call it SQL when it is the ANSI language. It is SQL in T-SQL and in the SQL Server domain. I don't know. I don't know anymore. But SQL, wonderful language for data access. It is a domain-specific language for that intent. It's not perfect. It could be better. I wish the from clause were before the select clause. Other than that, there are a couple of things that, I really wish SQL did it this way. However, extremely successful language that has been around for decades, will be around for decades longer. And if you are a developer and you don't know SQL or some variant of it, whether that's T-SQL or PLSQL or PLPGSQL, doesn't matter that much. Spark SQL, pick one of them or more of them, learn it, because it's still going to be a popular language 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. I think this one's got extreme staying power because it is really difficult to come up with a significantly better domain language for data. And even if you come up with something that is marginally better, the problem you will run into is that you now have to convince a wide variety of people who are not extremely technically inclined that your domain-specific language for data is significantly better than SQL. When instead, what's really going to happen is as soon as you start pushing your language, people are going to say, yes, but how can I write a SQL query to get the same results? Which is why Fiesel's law is a thing. This is why I keep coming back to Fiesel's law. Why I firmly believe in it. And in case you don't remember Fiesel's law, the idea of Fiesel's law is that every data platform technology eventually develops a SQL interface. And the reasoning for this is you're not aiming a data language at the most technically inclined people. You are aiming this at the business inclined people who have just enough technical skill that they can't get their answers strictly from an Excel spreadsheet, that they need to go one step deeper. And that's where you need a language that is expressive and reasonably simple. I'm not going to pretend that T-SQL or any variant of SQL is extremely simple. There's a lot of complexity involved. We start talking recursive common table expressions. You can get to very impressive subqueries. You can get to rather complicated queries. A lot of this comes down to database design, and we have the lessons of the Kimball model of warehousing as make your databases simple for business users if you intend business users to be the primary users of those databases. For transactional systems where developers are the primary SQL writers, make those optimized for proper processing, proper data storage, proper constraints, proper data model. For warehouses and analytical systems, make those optimized for people who don't know very much, who know just enough to get into your system and then need to figure out a way to get their answers and to get out. So let's talk about why SQL succeeded. Successful due to timing, which is fair. Looking at SQL today, it might seem to be clunky. It is easy to make mistakes and lose valuable data if you do not know the language well and check it for mistakes. I mean, that's every language. Come on now. However, when you consider it among other languages and frameworks at the time, it makes sense. SQL is also based on strong mathematical foundation, relational theory, set theory, making it suitable for handling data sets and following statistical theory. Maybe. Data sets, yes. Statistical theory, maybe. The advent of the relational database from E.F. Codd of Boyce Codd fame in 1970. Relational databases organize data into rows and columns so it can be sorted. I don't like that explanation very much because relational databases are built on relations, which are entities and attributes. I mean, yeah, I guess you can say rows and columns. This is somebody who's writing for a non-technical audience. And mind you, relational database does not mean joins. That's a very common mistake that a lot of people make is thinking it's the relationships between tables when really relational just means you have entities and you have attributes. This is in contrast to the prior systems like network databases and hierarchical databases that existed prior to 1970 and that then got new life in the last 15 years because there is nothing new under the sun. HDFS is secretly a hierarchical database. Changed my mind. Okay. For example, SQL is the first language that could return multiple rows of data in response to a single request. Kind of helpful. And so on. There's evolution over time. There's workloads, vector databases, which Postgres has jumped on pretty well. SQL continues to expand. And I think this is okay. This is a little fluffy, but there's something that's kind of fun, kind of interesting about the article. Certainly, talks about, is lingua franca for data. It is the domain-specific language for data, which is the way I would phrase the same thing. But Ann Schlemmer has done a reasonable enough job of explaining some of the key benefits of SQL. So that's good. Now, my last article for the night, because we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to get to this one, and that is just mostly because of the name. The EU throws a hand grenade on software liability. And this is from the Seriously Risky Business Cybersecurity newsletter from Lawfare, part of the Brookings Institute, but I won't hold that against it. All right, the EU throws a hand grenade on software liability. This is talking about how software liability rules in the US and in Europe are quite different. So currently, especially in the US, software industry extensively protected from liability for defects or issues. And yeah, that actually is kind of interesting when you think about the fact that Delta Airlines, for example, is suing CrowdStrike for its role in taking down Delta servers for like quite a bit of time with the release of essentially untested configuration file. So there's some interesting legal outcomes that could arise from that. But if you actually read through EULAs, you will see all kinds of attempts to say, oh, well, you can't sue us for using our software. You assume all of the risk when you use our software. You have no legal remedy, that kind of business. And leaving aside the argument, which I think is reasonable, that EULAs are unenforceable, that there is no legal weight to a EULA. The problem is you have to bring the case to court. You have to bring it before a judge. You have to then roll the dice because you cannot trust that a court case will go the right way. You can only hope that it will go the right way, but there is always a chance that a court case can go the wrong way. So do not put your faith in the outcome of a legal incident. You will be burned. And there's a bit here on the struggle for software liability in the US. Some of the reasons why we haven't seen significant progress, like not much political will for it, a lot of lobbying and debate about how to implement liability. And by contrast, the EU has decided to go full EU and apply them to people rather than companies and let lawyers sort it out, as the EU does. You might wonder, why are there so few really good software companies in Europe? I have no idea. Ask the EU. So earlier this month, the EU Council has a directive that updates product liability law, treating software the same as any other product. So consumers can claim compensation for damages caused by defective products without having to prove the vendor was negligent or irresponsible. Which would get really interesting. Hey, I deleted my data from the database. It was defective because it let me delete my data. I'm coming up with it's a silly example, but knowing how lawsuits work, that might fly. It just depends. Did you get the right judge? Did you get the right jury? Did you get the right group of people who buy your claim? Do you have a good enough lawyer? All of that could be a maybe. I think it's going to be interesting to watch. And software makers can avoid liability if they prove a defect was not discoverable given, quote, the objective state of scientific and technical knowledge, unquote, at the time the product was put on the market. So if you have a bug in your software, people can sue you, which you might think, oh, this sounds like a good thing, until you realize how many bugs there are in software. And now at this point, well, we're not selling anything to Europeans anymore because, hey, who knows what kind of bug could show up in this? And again, that might sound like a good thing until you realize just how awful the world is. And now you've traded one awful state for another awful state. So I don't know what the right solution is for this, but I did want to share the article. I think it's interesting talking about some of the challenges, and actually it kind of ends down here. So this was the rest of the article. But it's some of the challenges that we would have in terms of trying to understand liability in a software industry that has spent decades without liability, and where we run the risk of introducing incentives to radically change software, and not necessarily in a good way. So you'll have potentially a lot less innovation. You'll have potentially, oh, you can't buy this because you live in Finland, and potentially absurd results. Oh, well, it was a bug that you allowed somebody to perform this action that technically they're allowed to do. And so, like, I don't want to bring up the classic woman spilling her McDonald's coffee case, because in that scenario, that sounds like this is exactly the type of product liability silliness, except in that case, the coffee was boiling hot. And that was an actual problem where the coffee was hotter than it should have been. But there are enough scenarios of people got sued for really dumb things. Yeah, third degree burns, exactly. Yeah, so my recollection was that the coffee itself was hotter than the legally prescribed limit for how hot beverages should be, which was the case of the lawsuit. It wasn't, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you let me spill hot coffee on my lap. It was, you were violating code in putting this coffee to be like almost boiling point. And so that led to burns that should not have happened. Or Marshall points out, our contracts will get even more specific about what is not being covered or guaranteed, which would get into an interesting question if the EU says, well, too bad, I don't care what your contract says, our law supersedes it. And then, we have cases where things go into the courts, and they'll go into the court system for a while, and then the EU will use this to get a lot of money from Meta and Google so that they can pay off their mistresses. With that, we're going to wrap things up for now. Before I do want to go to meetup.com/trypass, because, quick note, we've got one meeting this month. I'll have to double check that. I think we don't have the Russians are getting quadrillions of rubles from Google. Don't worry, the check is in the mail. I saw that article. It was silly. It was like I could send an email to Google and say, you owe me $20 quadrillion, and it's just as likely that Google would pay me as they're going to pay the Russians. But meetup.com/trypass, we do have in person coming up on the 19th of November. Carlos Lopez is going to talk to us about creating on-demand APIs, scalable solutions with Azure SQL Database, and the Data API Builder. So come check that out. Meetup.com/trypass. And we will have one more episode of Shop Talk coming up in a couple of weeks. But that's about it for November. It'll be a quiet November. We'll have a little wrap up of Past Summit if there's any interesting news that comes out of that. But until we do see each other at Shop Talk, maybe in person, maybe at a future TryPass event, everybody, take care.
Have a good night.